of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Unfortunately, accidentally, a friend of mine stole one of his jokes and didn't know that he actually just thought of the same premise.
Yeah.
And he was the premise was that homosexuality in some places is illegal. And what do if they catch you? Well, they lock you up in jail with a bunch of men who want to have sex with you. And that was Lenny Bruce's line. Dig, homosexuality is illegal, right? So what do? They put you in jail with a bunch of men who want to have sex with you. That was his whole, that still would work today. If there was a place where homosexuality was illegal today and you did that joke, it's a good joke. It's set up, punchline, it's all right there.
Okay, hello, and greetings, the motherfucking damned. Hi, this is Jake Flores, solo episode for reasons I will explain momentarily. First off the bat, trigger warning, spoiler alert, depending on who you are. Either warning that you won't enjoy this, or I'm sorry to give away your favorite thing too early. But lots of offensive words coming up here. I'm going to play a Lenny Bruce clip that has the N-word in it and centers around the concept of the N-word. Don't say I didn't warn you. We're going to be talking about profanity, taboos, and all that sort of shit, edgelord shit today, so it's unavoidable to sort of not say some of the things that are going to be said. And kind of defeat the purpose of talking about them. So just a heads up, that's going to happen. You've been warned. All right. The other thing I want to get out of the way right off the bat is if you are a listener to the show and you noticed this shit didn't come out last week, here's the reason it's going to be a week late. And we'll catch up. If you've been a listener, there's an ebb and flow to this fucking show sometimes. Didn't get into podcasting to be on time for everything, but I will try to make a good shit. That's the pod damn guarantee. Okay, so the reason the show's late is the same reason the show exists at all, which is I'm fucking insane. I'm mentally ill, y'all. I had a manic episode last week while a bunch of things were going on, namely some dumb fucking beef in the comedy community. That's my least favorite phrase of all time. The made up ass brotherhood of comedians that doesn't exist. But I was recording shit about it in real time and then kind of went off the rails for a couple days and blacked out and decided this story didn't really make sense documentary-wise in real time. So I didn't really upload some of that shit, or I didn't think it fit to give y'all as a product. And then it hit me later on as I was getting my shit together this week that this thing I want to talk about today dovetails pretty nicely with all this dumb fucking bullshit that if you're listening to this, you're either privy to or don't give a fuck about. So I won't go into it too hard. But that's the reason we're talking about what we're talking about today. And also, if you do want to hear me fucking blacked out and keyed up and talking about local comedy politics, or not, whatever, somewhat local comedy politics, then you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/poddammamerica, which is the name of this show. Again, that's patreon.com/poddammamerica. Yeah, that's how we're advertising this now. A through line through what I'm going to be talking about regarding some of this comedy shit is this is not a real industry. It shouldn't be, at least. It doesn't pay. And so some people choose to make money in it by sort of drumming up controversy by throwing their friends and coworkers under the bus by booking rapists and fascists and things like that in their little comedy venues and shows and shit. Me, I'm just gonna talk shit and then put a link to a thing up there. And if you want to know whether you were talked about on it, you can pay me $5 at patreon.com/poddamnamerica. Patreon.com. That's what we came up with this week. We'll be right, back to normal with interviews with smart people and shit soon. But I don't know if this is like a thing that happened in real time. Without paying too much credence to it and dragging Twitter politics into our little show here. I don't know if you heard, but some people who, why even, some fucking libertarian, right-wing shithead comedy types, which is a thing in comedy, decided to book like alt-light types at venues that are liked by people in town here, thus throwing everyone under the bus. The club owners fucked because, they need to make money, and also, what are you going to do, the audience it's going to be a bunch of shitheads anyway. It doesn't matter. These people have basically been trying to use me as a way to advertise their show by really ramping up the fucking online, bullshit, harassment and stuff. You guys, I'm sure like a lot of you people that are listening to this are probably like the chuds that are obsessed with me. So, thanks for your listens or whatever. A lot of those people have been sending me pictures of our dead co-host. And, weird fucking like skull imagery and stuff, and like, just like weird fucking slurs and shit. So thanks. I don't know. It's annoying. It's fucking stupid, but it's also like, did you see the logo of our show? I think about Raghav every time I look at her fucking skull. God damn it. So, yeah, I don't know. All these fucking coincided with just a regular old fucking manic whoop-de-doo thing. And I've since sort of like sobered up and put the pieces together and had a Monday, and it occurred to me that this is all relevant to something I was already writing about anyway and already preparing an episode on. Having these dumb interactions with the alt-light and the sort of like free speech dork libertarian crowd side of fucking comedy and podcasting, the O&As and the Cellar crew and the fucking Sniper and all that shit, which if you've listened to our comedy episodes before, we've gotten into this shit. We did a Nick DiPaolo episode and, talked about why this fucking thing exists. And so I'm going to kind of build on some things we were talking about there. But it occurred to me a while back that this maybe isn't as obvious to the person out there at large as it, I guess, seems to me because of, a difference in perspective. What isn't obvious is the answer to the question, why do the chuds love Lenny Bruce? Why do the MAGA fuckheads, why do, fucking basement virgins and shit, why do those people think that they are the rightful heirs to the free speech warrior thing? Why does this happen? This occurred to me a while back when I was talking to a friend of mine about Carlin and Lenny Bruce and Bill Hicks or whatever, and I was talking about how ironic it is that so many of the people that claim to be like, real fucking heads, like real big fans of those guys are, chuds, like they're right-wing types or like Trump guys. And then this person went, huh? And I went, oh, fuck, right. Not everyone has my perspective. Not everyone spent the last 12 years hanging out in dark bars with guys with fucking Rodney Dangerfield forearm tattoos and shit, dropping Doug Stanhope's name and pretending, like cosplaying like we're on the forefront fucking lines of, some sort of cultural battle for, for freedom of speech. It's really funny. It's really fucking funny how much these people like hate Antifa and like, will, not entirely incorrectly criticize this, the cosplay aspect of something like Antifa as being like, as political cosplay, while, really projecting like their own anxiety about what they're doing onto it, because it's, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. These guys, by the way, fucking CHUDS, Tim Dillon, Luis Gomez, fucking dorks. They all think Antifa is like a fucking like a thing that's like after them, like a real threat. One of these fucking dudes sent me a crazy email one time that was just like, should these people be allowed to come to my show and shut me down and like fucking shut down what I'm doing, like as if doing stand up for fucking heads is important, as if it's like a real thing, but also as if that's gonna happen. As if someone's gonna show up and throw a milkshake at you, and if they do, like, A, you're fucking asking for it, and B, you're a clown. You're a professional clown. I mean, I've done shows behind chicken wire fences and shit on purpose, where the point is that people are gonna throw shit at you, and that makes sense. I'm doing this because I can't play guitar, This is not like a fucking a respectable art form to begin with. You're not like a hero up there, People, you fucking get shit thrown at you. It's fun. Who cares? But it's funny, man. These people also think like, there's one of these fucking dudes emailed me. He's like, what is the Antifa's goal? What are they is it world domination, And like part of the reason I started the show is because like people were saying shit that was that fucking dumb post Charlottesville that I thought, maybe rather than trying to talk to my Facebook friends, one group at a time, I should make a thing, And it doesn't pay anymore to really be an independent journalist, or at least the way I was trying to do it. So I figured, okay, better than a Facebook post. We'll make a tangible piece, instead of pitching this to whatever. Make my own platform, right? Here we are. So as you can tell from what I'm describing, I've had a back and forth with these people for a long time. I've had to deal with fucking shithead like old aging white guy, polo shirt tucked into the Wrangler's, cell phone on your hip, shitty guys that think that they are the smartest person in the room because they read a reason.com article and have like a basic 8th grade understanding of this thing called free speech, right? And it's really funny until it's sad and it's annoying and they run comedy and you go, what is the point of, of trying to do this or trying to climb the ranks in this industry. I realize this is a lot. Okay, so the reason I'm talking about this is because I want to talk about Lenny Bruce. I want to talk about Lenny Bruce and George Carlin, Bill Hicks, and from there some other people, and I want to answer the question: why do MAGA chuds think that they are Lenny Bruce? It's funny. It's one of those situations where you go, if this person actually met you, they would beat the shit out of you, but you think that they're your friend, And in order to draw this image up to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about, I want to talk about artistic movements a little bit. I want to talk about something I learned once upon a time in a fucking art history class in college. I want to talk about something called the horse in motion. The horse in motion is a photograph from 1878. It's actually a compilation of photographs. It's a series of quickly taken photographs of a guy riding a horse. And it's the first time this has ever happened. This is how they capture like who won a horse race. They have that really fast camera that takes like 30 pictures in a row right as soon as the horse crosses the finish line. The first time this had ever happened was in 1878. And I'll read you a little bit from the Wikipedia page here. The Horse in Motion, a.k.a. Sally Gardner at a Gallop, I guess that was the name of the horse, is a series of photographs consisting of a galloping horse. The result of a photographic experiment by, this is a real motherfucking name, Edward Muybridge. Okay. Eadweard. That's how this dude spelled the name Edward. Muybridge. M-U-Y. Bridge. Or in Spanish, very much bridge. I don't know. So, this happened in June of 1878. And, it's basically like a flip book all put together. It's a bunch of quick photographs of a horse. It consists of 24 photographs shot in rapid succession that were shown on something called a zoopraxiscope. And it was shown around and commissioned by this guy who's a fucking industrial whatever. Zoopraxiscope is essentially like you rotate it really fast and it makes flipbook shit happen. This is like funny turn of the century technology. It's interesting. It existed around a time when all this stuff was new. Photographic technology, rapid succession photography. Another thing that was happening around this time is something known as phantasmagoria, which is a practice where basically what you would do if you were a phantasmagorist, or however you say that, was you would travel around from, western mining town to mining town with this projector, which is a thing that no one had seen yet. This is, right around the time of like movies becoming a thing. So the first person that ever had a projector just traveled around with it and told ghost stories and would gather people in a tavern, turn the lights off, tell a ghost story, kick on the projector, project an image of someone walking around on the wall. Holy shit, everyone freaks out, right? You make a bunch of money. You skip town on one of those little push carts with your top hat flailing in the wind. Some woman tied to the tracks and shit. Shit like that. Right, so the reason this story is important is because all these things were changing rapidly, more rapidly than they'd ever changed before, and they caused these big watershed moments in consciousness, in like the collective social understanding of what like just basic parts of reality to change faster than they ever had before. Namely, with the horse in motion, most important part of the story of the horse in motion is that the reason they took this photograph was to settle a bet between some people who were arguing over whether a horse, when it's running, ever has all 4 feet off the ground at the same time. Now, if you actually try to watch this with the naked eye, it's imperceptible, or at least up until that point it was. And the reason it's imperceptible is because it's like faster than you can really comprehend. So you needed a camera to deconstruct it. What's interesting about this is that after they took these photographs and permeated the evidence that indeed sometimes a horse is in the air with all 4 of its hooves off the ground, coupled up beneath it, suddenly everyone understood this. The idea, the image of a horse galloping permeated throughout art, culture, movies, fucking published print, etc. And now you can imagine what that looks like with your mind's eye. Right? It's pretty interesting. You can see the Deftones sticker on the back of a truck. That image, horse kind of galloping, right? The Montucky fucking tall can blue beer, the cover of Old Town Road, the horse with its feet all right. But people before this couldn't, and the evidence of that is, years and years and years of fine art, like commissioned art by, aristocracy, monarchy, all this shit. All these old paintings that predate this photographic experiment show horses jumping around like kittens, basically, with like the front paws operating as one thing and the back paws operating as, so like they're kind of like pouncing like a cat. It's really funny to look at these old paintings now. because what you know now is that they all four legs like operate independent of each other. And the reason this is important is because, you know, what this is a watershed moment where an entire society's understanding of something changes at the same time, which is a thing that happens in visual art, and to a further extent is a thing that I think we can see happening in something as dumb as stand-up comedy, but I don't know. We might have, like, I guess what I'm going to get at is, like, it might have stopped happening, like, recently. We'll get back to it. More important to this is the story of Lenny Bruce, who is a comedian who, throughout his life, had a relationship with the state regarding free speech and obscenity. He's all sorts of things. Since he's a comedian from a long time ago, he's not really relevant to stand-up unless you're talking about it in a historical sense like this. If you're curious about him, don't listen to his records. They won't make sense. They're about topical things from the 60s, or the 50s if you go back even further. If you do want to understand him, I would recommend watching Lenny, which is the 1974 autobiographical film in which he is portrayed by Dustin Hoffman. I like the film a lot. I think it does a really good job of telling the story in a way that even now is still understandable. It's shot in stark black and white. Dustin Hoffman plays him great. And he does something that's really hard to do with stand-up, which is that as an actor, he does some bits, and they selectively pick bits that work in the story and also are still relevant. If you put on a Lenny Bruce record, he's going to be talking about like Spiro Agnew's fucking dog or something. It's not going to make any sense. But the more just like basic, shit where he's talking about sex and human nature and politics and stuff like that, it's, some of it is evergreen. All right, so that movie's it's pretty good. I check it out. But I'm gonna sort of go through his life story in a second. The first thing I'm gonna do though is play a bit from that movie, which they pretty much copied verbatim and performed verbatim, which is something that got me thinking about this altogether recently, regarding the subversive nature of irony and whether it still plays a fucking role, or whether it's doing what we think it's doing. And the bit is something that moved me a lot when I first saw it, and I still think that it explains the nature of like comedy in a way, and taboo words and vulgarity and irony on purpose. And it's a bit where he's talking about the N-word and sort of shocking people with all these racial slurs, and then sort of explaining, hey, when you use these words, they don't have as much power, right? I'll play it right now and we'll talk about it. Again, just to reiterate before we go into this clip, this is where the dude says the N-word like a million times. So if you're listening to this at work, don't let the headphones slip out of your phone or computer right now. And also, if you don't want to hear this, don't listen to the next couple of minutes of this podcast. Okay.
Can you turn on the house lights, please? And could the waiters and waitresses just stop serving just for a second? Yeah, and turn off the spot. Now, what did he say? Are there any niggers here tonight? I know there's one nigger here because I see him back there working. Let's see. There's two niggers, and between those two niggers sits a kike. And there's another kike. That's two kikes and three niggers. And there's a spick, right? There's another spick. Ooh, there's a wop, there's a Polak, and a couple of grease balls. And there's three lace curtain Irish mix, and there's one hip, thick, hunky, funky boogie. boogie, boogie. Mm-hmm. I got 3 kikes here. Do I hear 5 kikes? I got 5 kikes. Do I hear 6 spicks? I got 6 spicks. Do I hear 7 niggers? I got 7 niggers. Sold American. I've passed with 7 niggers, 6 spicks, 5 nicks, 4 kikes, 3 guineas, and 1 wop. You almost punched me out, didn't you? Well, I'm just trying to make a point, and that is that it's the suppression of the word that gives it the power, the violence, the viciousness. Dig, if President Kennedy would just go on television and say, I'd like to introduce you to all the niggers in my cabinet, and if he'd just say nigger, 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 every nigger he saw, boogie, 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 nigger, 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 till nigger didn't mean anything anymore, then you'd never be able to make some 6-year-old black kid cry because somebody called him a nigger in school.
Okay, so this bit, I think is a well-constructed way of explaining a concept that is, as it goes back pretty far in the tradition of comedy and joke telling, and there's no way we're going to get around it. There's no way we're not going to talk about it. It is the very thing that is being denounced in Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, right? Everyone take a drink, right? We mentioned Nanette, right? But it's something that, because I work in this fucking industry, I take for granted is not like super like offhand well known. So I'm going to talk through it a little bit, right? Regardless of whether you think this is true, there is some truth within the world of comedy that, taking the power out of words like that is a way that people have come to comedy. It's a thing that helps them survive, right? If you're like a fat kid, often, you find yourself getting teased a lot going to school, getting, harassed for being fat. So what do? You figure out, oh my God, if I make fun of myself for being fat first and I'm better at it than everyone, boom, right? You have control of the situation. This is something in Nanette, Hannah Gadsby argues, no, and didn't work for me, therefore it's not good. We talked about that on the fucking episode a year ago. But this would be like the precursor to that argument, the anti, Nanette or whatever. What he's explaining here is he's making an argument for the ability of comedy to take the power out of words that are hurtful, like racial slurs, yada yada yada. This is something that I watched early on, and it stuck with me. And often in defense of my friends that are on the fucking more irony poisoned side of comedy, is something that comes up. And I don't know. I want to get to the bottom of it. I'm not really sure how I feel about it anymore. But and the reason I say that, the reason is what was interesting to me is I was thinking about this a while back, and so I looked it up on YouTube to watch it, and the comments section was very telling. One of the first comments you'll see if you Google this and you find the same clip as me is just 4 months ago, someone saying, Owen Benjamin sent me here. You go, what the fuck? Why is Owen Benjamin going around sharing this thing, this piece of wisdom with people, right? Owen Benjamin being an openly fucking, right wing or alt right rather, fucking comedian, someone who's trying to pander to the reactionary crowd and be a fucking alt-right guy and make Milo Yiannopoulos money or whatever, because things weren't working out being a regular comedian. So, also, if you don't know who that is, look him up. It's hilarious. He got banned from an entire town. Well, Owen Benjamin sent me here. That's fucking weird. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll see these points of view that are very telling. People saying, this is when the left had it right. Now they're a bunch of fucking pussies. Now they're a bunch of, campus culture triggered fucking whatever, right? So you go, wow, why are these fucking reactionary alt-right shitheads identifying so hard with this thing? You know, the irony being that Lenny Bruce is like a beatnik. He's like an outspoken supporter of civil rights, you know, a leftist, anti-war, a lot of things that these people aren't. We can get into that, and there's some things that a lot of these people are on some level anti-war. It's fucking weird. Okay, and so in order to understand that, I think we should do a little history lesson, a little walk through the years, tracking his life and his relationship with free speech and the state, right? So Lenny Bruce was this guy who was kicked out of the Navy in 1945 for performing like a drag show for his what, your roommates, whatever the fuck you call it when you're in a boat, and it was like a comedic thing. Like he was trying to get a rise out of him, I guess. You know, gets kicked out. Maybe did it on purpose to get discharged. I don't know. But he then moves to New York and decides to pursue stand-up comedy. His mother is this woman named Sally Marr, who's a stage performer, and she starts getting him gigs and stuff, you know. And he's then a young comedian, not different from all these idiots I hang out with. But it's, you know, fucking 60 years ago. 70 years ago, I guess, at this point. So he's now, I guess, the person that's being portrayed in The Marvelous Miss Maisel, which I haven't seen. I heard it's good. I haven't watched it. I'll get around to it, but it's hard to get comics to watch, you know, crashing and shit. Shows about comedy, they get all the stuff wrong. It's annoying, but I've heard it's good, and I have friends that write on it, and you know, we'll someday support them by illegally downloading that show. Okay, so so he's living this, you know, this young comedian's life, and it's interesting. I've been thinking about him a lot because, you know, I've been getting into these arguments with these so-called, like, free speech guys who are comedians who have podcasts and radio shows and stuff and are sort of constantly framing themselves as being, you know, victims of censorship and persecuted by free speech. And we'll get into this, like, later. The kind of main point I'm going to get at is that there is a difference between being persecuted by the state and not having anyone come to your concert, right? The state versus the market are like two entirely separate things. But I was thinking about Lenny Bruce a lot because it's like he's this fucking old-timey guy, and you know, when I can't really get out of this without bringing this up, and I'm not going to try to dwell on this or cash in on it too hard because it's like I'm exhausted. I'm tired of fucking talking about this, but a year ago, I had Homeland Security come to my apartment over a joke, and then, you know, shit got taken down off the internet, and it was threatened by the state and all this stuff, and and that is a far cry from getting fired from, like, a TV network or a radio network because they don't think you're profitable anymore. And so it's really fucking weird that I get into these arguments with these alt-right comedian types over who's being more unfairly treated, because like that should happen to me, and honestly I still feel pretty free to say whatever the fuck I want. So like if I feel free, then you're fucking fine, right? But I've been thinking about him a lot because he also was censored by the state to a much further degree, and also liked bad music and and drugs. Young Lenny Bruce is really interesting. He's really funny, somewhat irrelevant, but we'll talk about his life a little bit. He developed his act by hanging out in jazz clubs and all sorts of different venues, and kind of going off. You'll see this if you hang around comedians a lot of times. There's a point where a lot of guys break and they're like, I'm done doing one-liners, I'm gonna fucking tell the truth, right? Well, that's a cliche now and it's fucking annoying, but you know, this maybe could be understood to be one of the first people that ever did it. And
I'd tell everybody what a nice person you were, too. I think that a lot of marriages went west, they went split up in my generation because ladies didn't know that guys were different. I mean, different. It's very tough for chicks to realize that although we speak the same language, that you can have babies. It's different. It's like no guy ever cheated on his wife, ever. But ladies would get hurt and want to leave the husband because they thought the husbands cheated, and they never did cheat. Because what cheating means, I know. To a lady, means kissing and hugging and liking somebody. You have to at least like somebody. Guys, that doesn't enter into it all the time. No. Ladies are one emotion, and guys detach. Not consciously detach, but they just do detach. Like a lady can't go through a plate glass window and go to bed with you 5 seconds later. But guys can have head-on collisions with Greyhound buses in disaster areas. Everybody's laying dead on the highway. Not only the hospital, in the ambulance, the guy makes play for the nurse. How could he do a thing at a time like that? Oh, I got horny. So what? I got hot. How could you be hot when your foot was cut off and you're dead? I don't know. He's an animal! He got hot with his foot cut off. I guess I'm an animal. What did you get hot at? The nurse's uniform. It's a moron, that's all. He's just an animal. No, it's guys detach and has nothing to do with them liking, loving. You put guys on a desert island, they'll do it to mud. Mud. So if you caught your husband with mud, somehow you could get overseas there. Mud! Don't talk to me, that's all. You piece of shit, you leave me alone, that's all. Go with your mud, have fun. You want dinner? Get your mud to make dinner for you, that's all.
That was Lenny. This next thing is Patrice O'Neal, just to sort of illustrate the evergreen nature of the shit he was, doing at the time.
Like, make it so women just like understand a little bit of, like, just to sympathize. It's like we're like sport fishermen. This is what I'm saying. Men like to fish. And sport fishing is different from catching fish for food. You just get it, you catch it, and you show your friends. Because you want them to know that you can catch fish. You take a couple of pictures so you can show people the fish that you have the ability to catch. And then you release it back into the water. But a lot of women in here, you have boyfriends or husbands, you a fish that jump back on the boat and just was like flapping, looking at me like, hi, I was wondering if you're gonna be fishing here again next week. Like, yeah, for other fish, get off my boat. Is that how you treat all the fish? You'd be like, oh, God damn. Nope, I'm sorry, sweetie. You're the last fish I ever wanted to be with. Now you stuck. You're stuck.
What was happening, I think, was that around the late 40s and through the 50s, this guy was finding himself unwelcome in certain venues. The more he started to do stream of consciousness shit, which you can probably tie to hanging out with jazz performers, he would just go off into talking about sex and filthy stuff and taboo shit and like racism and things like that, as you heard in the clip before. Because of that, he switched venues. Comedy happened in upscale nightclubs, but it also happened in like burlesque halls and strip clubs and shit, and like weird old timey rooms where the mobs in there smoking cigars and stuff, and and so he found himself reacting to his bookability and hanging out and working in strip clubs and like dating and eventually marrying a dancer, and then he, you know, he lived the fucking life that so many of us are living, which is not, he didn't, you know, get rich. He's fucking piecing shit together and scraping by and working as much as he can, and you know, this is also a story about somebody from fucking the 1950s. So, like, as much as I think this is kind of weird and lame, how much can you indict the person for it? There's one story that's really funny. In 1951, because he was trying to scrape up enough money to keep his wife from having to, you know, to strip, he started just committing like side hustles, just like scams. One of them involved posing as a Catholic priest named Brother Matthias while telling people that he was raising money for a leper colony, which, according to his own semi-autobiographical memoirs, he gave like half the money to and then kept. And they busted him, but he never got formally indicted for it because some legal loophole where he could prove that he gave them some of the money. Although he was found guilty of stealing like a priest uniform. Pretty fucking cool, right? So anyway, Lenny Bruce, right? Hangs out, does comedy. He's roommates with Buddy Hackett in the 1950s, writes screenplays for a living. They form a duo called Not Ready for Primetime Players, right? If that name sounds familiar, that's the name of the original cast of Saturday Night Live. They like used that name 20 years later in the 70s. And eventually he becomes this taboo, like, edgy comedian, right? Comedy at the time was a number of different things. It was, how do I explain this without sort of spoiling the story? I mean, the Marx Brothers are not far from this time. A lot of ethnic humor is still very acceptable. A lot of comedy is, you know, just impressions, which at the time were maybe considered hacky. And then this guy comes and he causes a paradigm shift, a watershed moment, right? He starts talking about like fucking and shit, and like talking about it in a really clever, funny way. And he's controversial, and, you know, people that are like cool start to become into Lenny Bruce, right? He's like a fucking favorite of, like, you know, there's a reason like Frank Zappa released his shit later on. He's out with musicians. So, you know, he decides to start talking about these things, and he goes against the grain of what is normal and what is acceptable in comedy at the time. And eventually this culminates in a reputation and this thing where he can only be seen in these like seedy clubs. And, you know, eventually he releases an album called The Sick Humor of Lenny Bruce, right? This is something that sounds so fucking hacky in retrospect, but it only sounds hacky because when someone does something that interesting, then everyone fucking mimics them, and then, you know, then they, in retrospect, they suck. But I think historically, you know, that's a pretty cool thing that happened in the 50s. Yeah, I mean, another thing to be said about this stream of consciousness thing that he sort of came upon and developed, and a lot of comedians find themselves coming upon, is that, like, he at the time could be argued to have derived it from the beatniks and shit he was hanging out with. It's similar to the automatic writing process that, like, William S. Burroughs sort of, you know, made famous. I don't know. There's a lot to be said here. But what's interesting is a little later on, he starts getting in trouble for obscenity, right? In 1961, he's arrested in San Francisco for saying cocksucker on stage. Later on in Philadelphia, he's arrested for possession of, like, narcotics, probably marijuana, fucking morphine or something. In L.A., he's dragged off stage by the cops for calling someone a schmuck, which is Yiddish for dick, I guess. Which is really funny. Because that you could say that in, like, a cartoon now or whatever. A quick note on obscenity. It's really interesting. Is it, you know, we're going to talk about this and, like, Carlin and stuff a little bit. But obscenity also changes with time. if you ever, as long as we're talking about the word cocksucker, if you've ever seen the show Deadwood, it's sort of famous for this character Al Swearingen, the barkeep, calling everyone cocksuckers and motherfuckers and shit. And he's this awesome, intensely foul-mouthed, offensive character. But a little known fact about that show is that it's written about the cowboy days, the fucking Red Dead Redemption days, right? And when they wrote the original script of that show, they researched what the characters would actually talk like to make it historically accurate. And there are, I guess, 2 types of curse words in recent English history. There's the scatological, which is what all these dudes are talking about, cocksucker, motherfucker, all that shit, and the blasphemous. If you've never thought about this, it's kind of interesting. There's, it's bad to say damn and hell and heathen and all this shit, right? Bastard is another one. So apparently during the Deadwood days, during the time and place that Deadwood is actually based on, all of the curse words people would use were blasphemous curse words. So they shot the fucking first episode apparently with Al Swearingen calling everyone darn tootin', heathens and naysayers and evildoers and shit, and it just sucked. So they made a decision to change it, to just make on purpose a historical anachronism where he's a fucking, he talks like he's from now and he's trying to piss someone off, because otherwise the show wouldn't have the same weight. Anyway, that's just a footnote I wanted to jam in there. But back to Lenny Bruce and his fucking dealings with the law, right? He starts getting arrested, dragged off stage by the police and shit, and sort of lends itself further to his identity as an iconoclast. So, this culminates in 1964 in an evening at the Cafe Au Go-Go in Greenwich Village, where Lenny Bruce is formally arrested for the umpteenth time. The police at this point had been following around, yada yada yada. In New York, they decided to send undercover police to this show at Cafe Au Go-Go, and the cops shut down the show. He says something interesting. He says, "Show's over, folks," which is then understood to be like a double speak thing where he's making fun of the way cops talk. Crazy, right? They arrest Lenny and also the club owners. This is interesting because the owners of a lot of clubs at this time, by this point in Lenny Bruce's career, mainstream clubs all over the country wouldn't book him, and it wasn't because they were worried about their ticket prices. It was because they were worried about getting shut down by the fucking state, right? The police were just showing up and breaking up all this fucking dude's shows. So he's arrested. The club owners are arrested. There's a 6-month celebrity trial. All 3 are found guilty. He's sentenced to 4 months in a workhouse. This is in 1964. You could be sentenced to 4 months in a workhouse for, fucking labor, like forced labor by the American government for saying cocksucker and shit, right? He gets out on bail. He's still performing, and the end of Lenny Bruce's career is really, sad. He's basically driven kind of crazy by the whole experience, gets very paranoid, gets further into drugs, and they say the late era Lenny is this thing where you'd go watch him and he'd just be muttering and insane and obsessed with his trial, and he'd be reading the transcripts from his trial on stage, which at first is a bit, and then after a while it just takes up the whole show and you go, what the fuck is this, right? I think that the initial bit of what he's talking about is kind of funny, where he's describing himself as a comedian being in the situation where when you have to go to the court, they read your material very clinically and sterilely, and then you stand there and you go, I think his line was they're fucking butchering my bits, right? And then it makes everyone reflect on the nature of irony and go, yeah, jokes are not literal fucking things. This guy's, he's not being indicted because of the meaning of what he's saying. He's being indicted because of the literal interpretation of it. It's pretty fucked up, right? Anyways, he dies while he's out on bail in 1966. They find him in his apartment with a needle in his arm, burnt thing of morphine. Apparently there was a typewriter in the room, which was like, he's halfway through writing some weird conspiracy theory. It's a pretty sad story. But he died midway through, this court case, which he later was, posthumously pardoned for, in like 2010 in New York. It was like the first time that's ever happened here. So it's interesting, Some of his bits are evergreen. He's got all this great stuff about like the nature of like gender roles and stuff, which can be echoed later on in like Patrice O'Neal's stand-up. People like that. This obviously is like an architect of the whole fucking thing we're doing. But it begs the question, why do CHUDS think they are this guy? Because this is not an isolated thing. He's very anti the state, but that also means at the time in the 1960s being anti, a lot of things that Republicans identify with. And so to continue drawing this line, another thing that's important to understand. Oh, shit. Fucking somebody just dropped something. Okay, I'm back. Somebody knocked some shit over in the living room. I thought somebody had broken something. Nope, everything's fine. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. During the heyday where this guy Lenny Bruce is getting arrested, dragged out of shows by the cops and everything, his audience is a bunch of young hippies and stuff. And one night in one of the audiences, there is this guy who is, just some smart ass, and who's, I can't remember if he's drinking underage or not or whatever, but the cops come in and they bust some person for underage drinking. They go around, they cart everybody else. He answers to the police. I don't believe in ID or some weird hippie shit like that. Bing, bang, boom. This is how George Carlin, a young George Carlin, ends up in a paddy wagon with Lenny Bruce, right? So this thing is directly handed down between these two people. Interesting moment in history. Cool, right?
And then suddenly this policeman stood up, and I believe he actually said the words, "Okay, folks, the show is over," which, of course, is a cliche that policemen use just at a killing, in a bar. When the crowd is, they want to break up the crowd. Okay, the show's over, the show's over. He actually said it in context.
Show's over, ladies and gentlemen. Please, everybody have a seat, please. Lights up.
They began to check people's IDs. They had the people leave the club through the only door, the upstairs only door, one by one show their ID, because basically what they wanted to do was to catch someone underage so they could give the club trouble. And they found this girl, apparently. I guess she was 15 or something, I forget now. But in checking everyone, Vince and I just kept drinking our beers, and all the beer we could get, because the upstairs bar was right there. The service bar was in there. I was good and juiced by the time we got to us, and we purposely waited to be almost the last people just to watch all this going on. So when I got to the door and the police was there, ID, you want to see your ID? I said, I don't believe in ID. Just a smart-ass Irish guy, a little drunk, who didn't like authority anyway, and didn't really care much for regulations my whole life. So I always give him some shit, So I said, I don't believe in ID. So he was a little exasperated by this point, this policeman. I guess he was in plainclothes. And he sort of grabbed me by the collar of the suit and the baggy pants of my ass, and kind of bum rushed me down the stairs, kind of forcing me down the stairs, and on my way out. And downstairs, there was a place that you'd pass through, and on the left there were two little portals that led into the bar area and the cocktail lounge area. And I knew Brenda was in there. So as they're rushing me past that, I said, "Tell Brenda I'm going to jail." And I got outside into a paddy wagon, an old-fashioned regular paddy wagon, this writer from Swank magazine was in there. And I really don't remember if Lenny was in there, because he said, "What are you here?" Yeah, I guess he must have been, because he probably said to me, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I didn't give him my ID." And he said, "Hey, you don't be a schmuck, you know."
George Carlin goes on to become someone who, who carries on a lot of the things that Lenny Bruce talked about, namely, speech, freedom of speech, all these fucking things. And now I know all these fucking dumbasses with like fedoras and shit and tattoos of George Carlin. George Carlin, most famous for this bit called the seven dirty words you can't say on TV, right? The 7 words that you can't say on TV, this being the, this core bit for a long time in his career, are shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Everyone knows these 7 dirty words. Maybe you don't. I don't know. I heard this shit when I was a kid and I was like, oh, this is badass. But not everyone was raised on stand-up comedy. Anyways, this is his sort of flagship, closer. It's the thing that brings down the house. Carlin is, you probably know who he is. He was a big stand-up comedian in the 70s. And he goes on to carry this sort of tradition on into the 70s. Then something happens. Again, we could talk a lot about the life of George Carlin, but, just to reiterate, leftist, but right-wing people like them for some reason. Doesn't make any sense. A lot of what George Carlin was talking about was, on some level, like, Marxist shit. He's talking about the atomization, the way they keep you working and stuff like that. And then also a lot of times he was just scatting. He did all sorts of fucking crazy shit. Near the end, he was just talking about people fucking dying, calling people cocksuckers. But important part to the story here is his tango with the FCC and the Supreme Court. So at one point, a guy named John Douglas, an active member of a group called Morality in Media, claimed that he heard the WBAI broadcast while driving with his then 15-year-old son, and complained to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, that the material was inappropriate for the time of day, being 2 p.m. This caused the FCC to embroil Carlin in an ongoing, long, complicated case that went all the way to the Supreme Court and then was resolved basically in a win for free speech for the First Amendment, right? This literally went to the Supreme Court. It was decided and sort of compromised in a decision that that related all this to terrestrial radio and television and the monoculture. The idea that media like TV and radio and shit comes to you and it's on in your house and you have a little nuclear family and your kids are there, right? And so part of the ruling at the end of this long fucking court case that I won't read all the way through because, who cares, is they decided that there would be let's see, let me find the words here. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's what it was. They carved up the fucking day into like 2 sections. One where you could say offensive words and one where you couldn't. So it was like this weird half victory for curse words, vulgarity and shit. And that is why Sipowicz was allowed to show his ass on NYPD Blue. I think I'm getting that right. In the 90s, there was a cop show where like one of the fat cop Dana DeVito guys showed his ass. It's because it had went into implementation. After 10 p.m., you can do things that you can't normally do on TV and on the radio and shit. And this, I would say, is the watershed moment. This is the horse the photograph of the horse. This is the thing that changes everything. And I think it's important to isolate that this is where everything changed, because the implication from a lot of these fucking chuds is that they're still fighting this fight that Carlin was fighting, right? And the thing that I think is clear in their misunderstanding of the difference between their fight and Carlin and Lenny Bruce's fight is has to do with the state, right? Because George Carlin and Lenny Bruce were fighting against the state. I'm not going to go into Bill Hicks and Doug Stanhope for more than a couple sentences. A lot of comedy nerds who are consider themselves, quote unquote, truth tellers, consider the truth teller tradition of stand-up comedy to have been a thing that was passed from Lenny Bruce to Carlin, then later on to Bill Hicks, and then to like people like Stanhope and like Louis C.K. and now look at fucking Louis C.K. as a right-wing chud, right? Or at least he's like pandering to them, and then this goes all the way to fucking Nick DiPaolo, and it goes even further to these people's opening acts, who are people that I avoid eye contact with when I see them at comedy clubs. And it comes all the way back around to me, bitch. So, the truth teller thing you can sort of draw through people like Bill Hicks, but he wasn't interacting with like society in the same way as Bruce and Carlin were. I'll talk about this more in the future. It wouldn't make sense to jam all this shit in here. Because Hicks is more, he was just fighting with comedy. He was like a punk band that writes punk music about the scene, or the thing itself and performing. Okay, whatever. Moving on. So what happens, right? George Carlin has this landmark court case where suddenly the rules of what you're allowed to say on TV have to be assessed. Now, backing up a little bit. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Let's talk a little bit about the context in which Lenny Bruce started this fight, right? I'm going to read a little bit from an article in Vice written way back in the ancient year of 2015 by my pal Josh Androsky about comedy at the time. And I guess it wasn't that long ago. It was like 4 years ago, but it seems like a million years ago to read about this and think that, like, back in 2015 when Josh wrote this article, Jerry Seinfeld was still complaining that far back about political correctness and these fucking things that these guys seem to understand to be this huge impediment on them. These millionaire-ass, comedians, Jerry Seinfeld and, Tim Allen, all these old fucking shitty guys, right? This article, I'll link to in the comments, is called "Modern Comedians Complaining About the PC Police Are Crybabies." I think it's true. So, in this article, Josh reads from a book called by Cliff Nestoroff. The book's called "The Comedians, Drunks, Thieves, Scoundrels, and the History of American Comedy." I'll read from it a little bit on upcoming podcasts. It looks pretty good. I'm only a little bit way into it. But he talks about the context in which Lenny Bruce existed and why Lenny Bruce being cited by people that considered themselves to be fighting against the PC police is a little spurious, right? Here are some stories from around the same time. Or even predating Lenny Bruce. Burlesque comedian Jimmy Savo was arrested by plainclothesmen in 1942 after an organization called the Catholic Theater Movement complained about his performance at the New York Ambassador Theater. The summons said the show violates the penal law prohibiting indecency on the stage. Comedians Mickey Diamond and Jack High were arrested for arrested for obscenity in 1946 in Philadelphia. They were removed from the stage at the Silver Fleet Inn and held on bail. Marty Wayne had problems with a Philadelphia judge who said nightclub operators should compel comedians to submit scripts before allowing them to go on. An arresting officer read portions of Wayne's act, and Judge McDevitt called the material an affront to public morals. The details have yet to surface, but the charge of quote-unquote lewd entertainment. But for that charge, Wayne served 6 months in prison. 6 fucking months in prison, right? In 1949, Lenny Ross was arrested in Atlantic City on charges of being quote-unquote smutty. The State Department demanded Ross be dismissed and barred from working based on previous convictions for using blue material and obscene language in his act, for which he served a prison term. Ross told the judge, "I only resorted to smut because patrons demanded it." So, what's interesting, and what's talked about a little bit in this article, in this book, is that, around this time that this thing was happening, that Lenny Bruce is this iconoclast, something that's not really explained in most biographical understandings of the guy is that, he wasn't the only one. Oftentimes movements like this are embodied by one person, at least in history. He was fucking cool. He was, the main guy. And so it can be, you can get seduced into thinking like this one guy smashed this whole fucking thing. But people were fucking shit up all over the place. And they were fucking shit up in reaction to each other. And something I think that a lot of like free speech MAGA chud dorks don't understand is that a lot of these motherfuckers were getting in trouble for fighting basically SJW fights. The Marx Brothers notably gotten a lot of shit for fighting against like racial caricatures. Right before World War I, racial characters were the height of comedy. You would do blackface, you would do Jew-face, you would do all these ethnic stereotypes. And post-World War II, there was a bit of a watershed moment, and people started to kind of move past that and go, well, at least the audience doesn't want it anymore. Maybe this isn't okay, yada, yada, yada. And comedians who didn't want to adapt and didn't want to advance and listen and adjust their material and keep working at what they were doing fought back against it and would make arguments like, well, no one has a problem with this Swedish character I do, right? And you would go, well, yeah, it's because Swedish people are not they're not being persecuted in any way in this country right now. So, no one really cares. It's not the same thing. It doesn't carry the same weight. It's kind of, it's irrelevant to like what Lenny Bruce is talking about in the N-word bit, right? And so, yeah, I mean, they would get in fucking fistfights and get dragged off a stage and all this shit. But the most important thing, the reason I'm bringing up all these arrests is that there's a glaring fucking detail here that is inconsistent with modern, like Nick DiPaolo-esque comedians' persecution complex and these stories. And that is the involvement of the state, right? So there's a mass difference between being arrested and held in prison by the government and people just not liking you, and maybe you getting, losing a TV show or something, or fucking, a job on Sirius radio, or people just not coming to your fucking show, or just people just saying you fucking suck, right? That's what's so fucking weird about the alt-right, especially right now, having this persecution complex and considering themselves to be part of the tradition of what Lenny Bruce and George Carlin were talking about. Doesn't make any sense. It's fucking weird, right? So let's try to answer the question. Why do the Chuds love Lenny Bruce, right? Why do the Chuds love George Carlin? Well, if you ask me, it's kind of interesting because you would think they would have like a more modern reference point for what they're talking about, but I think it's kind of telling that they really don't. Nobody in the world of conservative comedy at this point really embodies these values in any meaningful way. Nobody really is cool. Even the people that do consider themselves to be embodying these values and do have fan bases are like, like babies, like fucking, guys in like Dickies shorts that look like they're this close to getting sponsored for skateboarding or whatever, like fuck shitheads, nobody's as cool as Lenny Bruce. Why do you have to reach back that far? Well, let's look at some facts, right? In order to sort of align yourself with this upward arc of iconoclasm and fucking shit up, like society-wise, legally, then you kind of have to stop shortly after Carlin's FCC case. Because in order to imagine that there is a free speech war going on, which is so often the line, the narrative that these people will give you, you have to conflate free speech as a thing that is under attack legally with free speech that is a thing that you consider to be under attack, like just culturally. You can't really see a difference between the cops coming and dragging someone off stage and you not getting booked, essentially. That's why it's aggrieved, shitty white guys that have this perspective most of the time. But sometimes you can be a person of color or woman or gay or whatever and be so fucking bad at this and so mentally ill that you're also aggrieved in the same way. In order to believe the narrative that free speech is under attack in the way that these people would have you believe, you'd have to ignore the fact that after Carlin, after these FCC laws went into effect, there was a watershed moment. There was a moment when society saw the horse with all four of its feet off the ground, so to speak. There really, after this, wasn't an entire society-wide cultural taboo against cursing, or at least it wasn't on the rise. It was very much on the fall after this. Obviously, there were still uptight people, conservative people, church-minded people. There were still Ned Flanderses in the world, but as a general trend, you greatly increased your ability to say, naughty things on TV. From 2005 to 2010, primetime profanity increased by, check it out, 69%, right? This is around the time that, like, South Park became a thing. To understand culture as being under attack and free speech as being under attack, you would have to ignore the existence of shit like South Park, which not only had, a huge audience, but also basically free reign to do whatever the fuck it wanted. This is why you can't conflate these two things. Vulgarity, profanity, offensive ideas changed from being something that was illegal to just something that, maybe not be liked by 100% of the people. And that's why you look at the people who are so aggrieved by this, and more often than not, they are the most privileged members of society who are mad that they're not getting like 100% positive feedback for everything they're doing. Nick DiPaolo is being infringed upon in no legal way. He's just pissed off because not everyone wants to buy his shit, or not everyone wants to sell his shit. But losing a job at Sirius XM Radio, that's not your free speech being violated by the government. That's actually the free market. That's libertarian shit. That's the market speaking, as well it should, This is not healthcare. This is not a need that people have. This is a perfectly fine thing to exist in an elastic economic sense. This is, no one should be guaranteed the right to be a fucking comedian. You should absolutely be guaranteed the right to be, to go to a hospital. That's why it's fine that this exists in a libertarian fucking free market, like, open thing. All right. And so, the ultimate irony here is that these people, their favorite thing is what they're using as an example of persecution. But you have to ask yourself, why do the Chuds love Lenny Bruce? Why do they consider themselves to be fighting the same fight as him? And I think the answer there is the answer to, just a greater question at large, which is, why are shitty middle-class, well-off guys pissed off, even though they're doing, okay as far as, at least relatively within American society? Where do these people come from? Why is Trump the president, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer being the same answer. The answer, the question of why these people are like this is the same, it's the same question as, well, just why are there all these fucking dudes on my Facebook who record videos of themselves ranting about, Trayvon Martin and Colin Kaepernick and shit in their truck? It's the same thing. It's the same alienation. The alienation that, Trump capitalized on, and that white supremacists capitalize on, and that the alt-light and alt-right capitalize on, is that of young aggrieved men who live in a society that puts them in a situation where they're told they're supposed to be all these fucking things. There's not enough money. There's not enough jobs. They eventually get aggravated and culturally pissed off at what they perceive to be affirmative action, all this other shit, yada yada. It's the same fucking story every time, right? But instead of the culprit here being, the fucking guy they elected president, or banks, your fucking shitty bank, or your landlord, or the concept of capitalism at large, etc. Not to beat that fucking drum a million times. In order to arrive at this point, you have to stitch together a story that reaches as far back as Lenny Bruce and George Carlin. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Make America Great Again thing alludes back, 50, 60 years. And so does this concept of shitty comedians fighting the good fight the way it was fought 50 or 60 years ago in their imagination. In order to exist in this current year, 2019, and be, unpersecuted in this way, and somehow imagine yourself to be persecuted, in order to be a fucking right-wing person who's never had the cops tell them they can't say something, but somehow imagined that the government during this time is doing anything but the opposite of that, to be fucking hanging around and hearing about the cops kicking in people's doors for making, like left-wing arguments and jokes and things like that, but having never fucking heard that in the other direction. In order to make that leap of logic, you have to be kind of a coward. And you have to be someone who is insisting that the horse still fucking jumps around with its two front paws aligned like a kitten. You have to be someone in Lenny Bruce's time that is insisting that it's still okay to do blackface because, you know, whatever, because you won't admit that you don't want to evolve, and you don't want to, like, write new shit, essentially. That's what it comes down to. I don't know why I did a fucking hour of podcasting about this. The moral of the story is write new shit, I guess. I don't know. Get better. Anyways. Yeah. Write new shit. Don't be a fucking lazy hack. That's it. That's kind of all I got on this. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. If you didn't know about any of this shit, if you didn't or did or have any complaints, email them to someone else. I don't give a fuck. I wish I had a funny person I could say email this to that person, but everyone is afraid of the internet. Oh God, everyone is like, everyone has such a double standard about this shit. Okay, anyways, if you want to hear about that stuff, if you want to hear about the stuff I'm cutting myself off from talking about right now, hey, why don't you check out our Patreon on patreon.com/fucking-poddamnamerica for access to all of our bonus episodes. We do generally a bonus episode a week, as well as a regular episode a week. There's a fuck ton of shit back there, so if you just want to take a peek, $5. Can you tell I'm trying to plug this real hard? We're so close to being fucking employed off this, and Jesus Christ. What are you going to spend your money on? A cup of coffee? Fuck a cup of coffee. Kid in Africa? Nah. Come on. How about podcasters in Brooklyn instead of that? That's not even a thing people do anymore. All right, listen, I am still kind of keyed up, so I'm going to go drink some sleepy time tea and think about something else. All right. Tags on the internet.